The rain had started hours ago, but it showed no signs of letting up. Sheets of icy water whipped across the deck of the Sea Raven, driven by howling winds that shrieked like banshees. Captain Elias Thorne gripped the wheel with white-knuckled hands, eyes narrowed against the storm as waves crashed over the bow. Behind him, his crew scrambled to secure lines and keep the vessel afloat. "We're close!" he shouted over the chaos, his voice barely carrying. "Black Rock Isles, dead ahead!" First mate Corwin Dre looked up, soaked and pale. "That cursed place? You sure, Captain?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The black shape of the island had already risen from the fog, its cliffs jagged like fangs. And there it was, on the highest point cutting through the storm, the lighthouse. Even from here, it looked wrong. Its frame bent slightly to the side, its lantern chamber shattered, a rotting crown atop a dying king. They weren't here by choice. The Sea Raven had taken damage during a cargo run. The storm came out of nowhere. Their only hope was to seek shelter on Black Rock, forbidden or not. As the boat slammed against the island's crude dock, the crew leapt to action, securing the lines and hauling the injured below deck. Elias jumped to the planks, his boots splashing into cold seawater. The rain stung his face, and the distant thunder seemed to come from beneath the earth rather than the sky. "Take the wounded inland," he ordered. "Find shelter." "What about the lighthouse?" Corwin asked. Elias hesitated. "I'll check it myself." Corwin grabbed his arm. "You know what they say. People go in there and change, or they don't come back at all." "Good thing I'm not people," Elias muttered, pulling free. With only a lantern and a revolver, he trudged up the winding path toward the lighthouse. Each step was harder than the last, as though the island resisted him. Trees leaned unnaturally, their branches skeletal. The rocks were slick with moss and blood-red lichen. The wind carried strange whispers, almost like voices, but too distorted to be understood. By the time he reached the lighthouse, night had fallen completely. Lightning cracked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the structure. Up close, it was worse. Crumbling stone, rusted metal, broken glass. The door hung open slightly, swaying on one hinge. He stepped inside. The air was colder, impossibly so. The rot of salt and old wood filled his nostrils. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above, and shadows moved along the walls even though his lantern burned steady. The first floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, moldy books, shattered lanterns. Something moved upstairs. He froze, listening. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging their feet. Elias drew his revolver and started up the spiral staircase. Each step creaked under his weight. The walls were lined with rusted pipes, some hissing steam. Cobwebs clung to his coat. Halfway up, the lantern flickered. He paused. A child's voice whispered, "Don't go any higher." He spun around, gun raised. Nothing. "Who's there?" he barked. Silence. He continued climbing, heart hammering in his chest. At the top was the lantern room, shattered glass everywhere, the giant lens cracked and crooked. Rain pelted through the broken windows. In the center of the room, something sat on the floor. Elias stepped closer. It was a journal, bound in black leather, soaked and rotting. Next to it, a skeleton. The remains were half dressed in a faded keeper's uniform, bones snapped and scattered as if thrown. Around the corpse, symbols were drawn in chalk, concentric circles, runes, something like an eye. He knelt and opened the journal. The ink had run, but a few pages remained legible. "I see them at night. They walk the shore, whispering to the sea. The light no longer keeps them away. I lock the door. I carve the sigils. Still they come. Still they—" A boom echoed below. Elias stood sharply. The lighthouse shook. Then, a scream. "Corwin!" He turned and ran down the stairs, leaping over broken steps and cracked stones. The main door had been ripped off. The storm outside had intensified, but that wasn't what chilled him. It was the silence. No voices, no cries, no sounds of the crew. Elias stumbled down the hill toward the makeshift camp they'd set up earlier. Fires had been lit and tents erected. Now, nothing remained, not even footprints. "Corwin!" he yelled. "Mira! Jace! Anyone!" Only the wind replied. Then a figure. At the edge of the tree line, a woman stood, pale, drenched in seawater, eyes glowing faintly. Her mouth opened, but her voice did not match her lips. He should not have gone into the light. Elias backed away, hand on his revolver. "Who are you?" She raised an arm and pointed behind him. The lighthouse. Its light was on, glowing blood red, sweeping slowly across the island. "I didn't light it," he whispered. Then he saw them, figures emerging from the trees. Dozens, no hundreds, all dressed in remnants of sailor uniforms, old clothes, lighthouse keeper coats. Some were mangled, their limbs broken. Others seemed to walk just fine, but none of them were alive. They were coming. He ran, crashing through brush and roots. A pale hand grabbed at his ankle and he kicked free, heart pounding. He could still hear the light turning, the low mechanical whir, and the unnatural hum it gave off, a sound like something alive. He found shelter in a collapsed cave near the southern cliffs. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Minutes, hours. The light still turned, and every time it swept past, he saw shadows crawling along the rock above him. Not people. Not anymore. He clutched the journal to his chest, staring into the dark, breath ragged. He was not alone. The sound of Elias's breath filled the cramped space, shallow and ragged. Cold sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the salt and grime. The cave stank of rotting kelp and something else, something fouler, musky and coppery, like decaying flesh. He gripped the revolver tight, the damp leather journal pressed against his thigh. Outside, the crimson light from the lighthouse continued its slow, methodical sweep, casting hellish shadows across the trees. Every time the beam cut through the forest, he saw them, silhouettes that twitched, flinched, or stopped mid-motion, like puppets unsure of their strings. This isn't real, he told himself. This is a nightmare, a fever dream. A low gurgle echoed nearby. Elias raised the revolver. "Who's there?" he whispered. No response. He inched forward and peeked from the cave mouth. The shoreline had changed. The waves no longer reached the beach. Instead, they seemed held back by some invisible barrier. Where water once lapped, now lay dozens, no hundreds, of footprints pressed into the sand. Some were bare, others booted, many looked inhuman, elongated, split, as if something had dragged itself from the sea on hands and knees. Then came the humming, deep, bone-shaking. It came from beneath the earth. The island was alive. The ground trembled slightly. A rock tumbled from the cave ceiling. Elias ducked. As he looked up, he saw it. A mark scorched into the cave wall. A circular symbol with a vertical slit down the center. The same eye from the journal. The same eye drawn around the skeleton in the lighthouse. He reached into his coat and pulled the journal out again, flipping through the brittle pages until he reached one filled with charcoal sketches of that symbol. Beneath it, a single sentence stood out in a different, frantic hand. "The eye sees even when the light is out." Lightning cracked overhead. Thunder rolled. Elias didn't wait. He bolted from the cave and ran uphill. The figures were closer now, scattered through the trees like scarecrows. Their heads jerked to follow him, some twitching at odd angles. One had no face at all, just a hollow where features should have been. A scream tore through the woods, raw, animalistic. Then another, closer. Elias broke into a clearing, nearly tripping over something soft and wet. He stopped to look. A body. Corwin. Face down, throat torn open, eyes wide in terror. His skin was gray, bloated, and crawling with small, white sea worms. "No," Elias muttered. He dropped to one knee, checking for any sign of life. None. But in Corwin's clenched hand, something glinted. Elias pried the fingers open and found a brass key. Ancient, corroded, but clearly important. Attached was a sliver of metal, shaped like a lightning bolt, with the number 3 etched into it. The lighthouse had 4 levels, Elias recalled. 3 must be the engine room. Thunder again, louder, almost like a growl. He stood and kept moving, sprinting through the underbrush as rain slashed his face. He reached the lighthouse's base just as the red light swept overhead, freezing all movement around him. Everything went still, even the rain. He stepped inside the ruined doorframe. It was darker than before. His lantern flickered despite being freshly lit. The shadows writhed, stretching unnaturally across the cracked floorboards. Something watched him. He felt it behind the walls under the stairs. But he didn't stop. He took the spiral staircase down this time, to the sub-levels. Each step groaned like a dying man. The third floor, the engine room, lay behind a rusted iron door. He tried the handle. Locked. He inserted the key. It clicked open. Inside, machinery sat frozen in time. Massive gears, thick chains, levers and pistons. The whole room was soaked in old oil and dried blood. Symbols were carved into the metal, dozens of them, deep gouges that glowed faintly red. In the center, a control panel blinked. Elias approached cautiously. One screen flickered. A diagram of the lighthouse rotated slowly, highlighting areas in red. A voice crackled through a speaker, barely intelligible. A containment breach. Repeating, system corrupted. Do not look at the... Static. A trapdoor lay beneath the panel, marked with the eye symbol. The key didn't fit this one. He stepped back. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. From the stairs above. Slow. Deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Not rushed. Not panicked. Hunting. He doused his lantern and slipped into the shadows. The air turned colder. Something dragged along the floor above. Metal scraping wood. A wet gurgle. A breath like an animal choking. Then, silence. He waited. The door creaked open. A figure entered. Twisted, malformed. Its spine arched unnaturally high. Its arms dragged the floor, ending in fingers far too long. A hood concealed its face, but from beneath, light glowed. Red. Pulsing. The thing sniffed the air. A wet, rattling inhale. Elias didn't move. The creature turned toward the control panel, tapping long, nail-like digits across the buttons. The lighthouse's red beam intensified. The creature controlled it. Elias aimed his revolver and fired. The shot echoed like thunder. The creature screamed, a horrific, multi-pitched wail that burst blood vessels in Elias's nose. He staggered, and the creature leapt at him. He rolled aside just in time, narrowly avoiding its claws. The thing slammed into the wall, smashing metal and pipe. Elias scrambled up, fired 2 more shots into its chest. Black sludge sprayed. It didn't die. It laughed. A garbled, choking sound, like a dozen people trying to laugh through water. Elias ran, slamming the door shut behind him and jamming a broken pipe through the handle. The thing clawed at the metal, shrieking. He sprinted back up the stairs, but the lighthouse felt different now. The walls bent. The steps stretched longer than they should. Space twisted. Madness, he realized. The curse wasn't just haunting them. It was changing reality. At the landing, he collapsed, panting. The journal fell from his coat, open to a new page he hadn't seen before. The eye must be closed, burn the source, shatter the lens, or the sea will rise again. A sound behind him, a whisper, not from the lighthouse, not from outside, from inside his head. You're already part of it. Elias turned. No one was there, but his shadow wasn't his own anymore. Elias stared at his shadow, frozen. It had moved, independently, subtly, but unmistakably. While he stood still, it had tilted its head. Now it stood perfectly straight, mimicking him again. But something about its limbs, they were wrong. Too thin, too long. The elbows bent the opposite direction for a second before returning to normal. I'm losing it, he thought, but the pounding in his skull told him otherwise. Something had changed since he entered the engine room. Or maybe it changed the moment he stepped on Black Rock Isle. Either way, the rules of the world were unraveling. He tore his gaze away and began climbing again, pressing onward to the upper chambers of the lighthouse. The third level was treacherous, half-collapsed, filled with mold-eaten floorboards and rusted railings. Windows that should have looked out onto the storm instead revealed blackness, a void as if the world outside had been erased. Lightning struck again, illuminating the corridor ahead. In that flash, Elias saw them, figures, dozens, standing perfectly still along the walls. Pale skin, hollow eyes, each one identical. Same face, same expression. Mouths hanging open. As the light faded, They disappeared. He didn't wait to confirm. At the top, the control room door stood ajar. Beyond it was the lantern chamber, the source of the cursed red light. He stepped inside. The massive lens stood at the center, cracked and bleeding faint light. It rotated slowly, clicking with each turn. A strange fluid oozed from the joints, black ichor that hissed where it touched the metal. Chains hung from the ceiling, once used to operate the mechanism manually. Now they swayed on their own. The room stank of ozone and decay. He approached the lens. His reflection stared back at him, bloody, wide-eyed, disoriented. But as he moved, the reflection didn't. It just grinned. Elias recoiled. Something scratched at the back of his neck. He spun around, revolver raised. Nothing. But the air had shifted. Then the floor trembled. From the walls, shadows peeled away like dried skin. Figures emerged, sliding out of the stone itself. Women, men, children, all distorted. Some had too many limbs, others none at all. They encircled him in silence, their mouths opening wider than humanly possible, revealing rows of jagged, barnacle-encrusted teeth. Elias backed toward the lens. The journal's last message echoed in his mind. Shatter the lens. He fired a shot directly into the heart of the light. Glass exploded. The beam sputtered. And the room screamed, not the people, the room itself. The walls wailed, the floor buckled, and the sky outside twisted into colors Elias had no name for. The figures dissolved into smoke, sucked backward through the cracks in the walls like dying spirits. Elias collapsed, ears ringing. The light was gone. For a moment, only the sound of the storm remained. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy. He turned his head. A man stepped into the room. He was tall, soaked in black oil, his face half consumed by barnacles. His lighthouse keeper uniform was intact, but warped, fused with his skin. Where his eyes should have been were sockets filled with flickering red light. The light was not yours to destroy, the figure growled. Elias tried to aim his revolver, but his hands trembled. You're the keeper, he muttered. The figure nodded. Once, until I heard their call. Elias crawled backward. What are you? The keeper stepped closer, every footfall shaking the tower. I am the gate, the eye, the voice. I lit the beacon, not to warn ships, but to summon them. Lightning crackled, outlining the keeper in blinding light. He raised one hand, and the chains dropped from the ceiling, wrapping around Elias's limbs, yanking him to the center of the room, pinned like prey. You came seeking safety, the keeper whispered. Now you will bring clarity. The room dimmed. The broken lens began to vibrate, shards spinning mid-air, slowly reassembling. Red light pulsed at the center, brighter, hotter than before. It's rebuilding itself, Elias screamed as one shard slashed his side. Blood hit the floor and hissed. The lighthouse fed on it. Then, a distant sound, a voice. Elias! It was Mira, one of his crew. He turned his head just in time to see her rush into the chamber, soaked, wild-eyed, holding a flare. The keeper snarled. No, she belongs to the sea now, he roared. She hurled the flare. It exploded in white heat at the base of the lens. The light shrieked again, this time louder, deeper. The entire tower convulsed. Chains snapped, flinging Elias to the floor. The room filled with smoke and fire. Elias grabbed Mira's hand and ran. Down the stairs, dodging debris and broken wood. The lighthouse trembled from its foundation, groaning like a dying beast. What the hell is going on? Mira cried. No time, just run! They burst from the main door as the red light ignited one last time, this time brighter than the sun. The tower let out one final scream and exploded at the top, sending stone and iron in every direction. The lens was destroyed again, and the red light was gone. The sky returned to storm gray. The unnatural whispers faded, but the silence that followed was worse. They sat at the edge of the dock, gasping for breath. You survived, Elias muttered. I found shelter, she said, staring at the sea. But something followed me. I heard voices, saw people, friends who weren't there. I think they want us to stay. A distant groan came from the woods. Mira stood. We can't stay, Elias nodded. Let's find the others. If they're still human. They walked inland. The island was quiet now. still, but not empty. The sea had pulled back from the shore again, revealing shapes, boats, dozens of them, old, rotten, stranded in the sand, each one marked with the same symbol, the eye, and all pointing toward the lighthouse, or where it used to be. The tide had vanished entirely. Elias and Mira stood at the edge of the exposed seabed, staring at the graveyard of ships unearthed by the receding ocean. The air was thick with rot and mildew, and the seafloor pulsed beneath their boots, like a vast, sleeping heart. Mira swallowed hard. They weren't shipwrecks. They were offerings. The wrecks spanned decades. There were steamboats rusted to nothing but skeletal remains, wooden schooners whose names had long since faded, even a fiberglass yacht, scorched and broken, all drawn here, all circling the island like a constellation of sacrifice. Each bore the same mark, the vertical slit eye etched on their prows, painted in blood or burned into the wood. The lighthouse was supposed to warn sailors from crashing on the rocks, but instead it summoned them. "We have to get off this island," Mira whispered. Elias shook his head. "We destroy the source first. That light rebuilt itself once. It can do it again. Something down there wants it." Mira turned to him. "Down where?" Elias pointed toward the hollow where the lighthouse base had once stood. The explosion had reduced the upper structure to rubble, but its foundation remained. A dark, yawning hole ringed with broken gears and blood-soaked metal. A hatch stood in the center, half buried by debris, rusted, bolted shut, and oozing black water. Mira approached cautiously, nudging the hatch with her boot. It thudded, then knocked back. Both jumped. Elias raised his revolver instinctively. Mira lit another flare and dropped it beside the hatch. The metal hissed and steamed. "It's breathing," she muttered. "There's something alive under it." They circled the pit, examining the wreckage. What should have been a simple storm cellar now stretched impossibly deep. A stone staircase spiraled downward beyond the hatch, descending into inky blackness. "We go down," Elias said. "Seriously?" Mira frowned. "Into that? Whatever this curse is, it didn't start with the lighthouse. That place was just the surface." He reached for the hatch. It opened by itself. The fetid breath of centuries spilled out, and the shadows within seemed to reach for them like fingers. Neither spoke. They just descended one step at a time. Below was a tunnel, carved from stone, damp and slick. Symbols lined the walls, the same recurring motif of the eye, sometimes painted, other times scratched in blood. Farther in, the passage opened into a chamber. It wasn't natural. The walls were smooth, pulsing faintly with a reddish hue. Tentacle-like cords veined the ceiling and floor, pulsing like arteries. At the center of the room, a stone altar stood, cracked in 3 places. Pools of black ichor spread from its base, trailing into the walls like veins into muscle. Elias stepped closer and immediately staggered back. There were bodies, dozens of them, strung up along the walls, entombed in strands of seaweed and coral, preserved like statues. Their mouths hung open in mid-scream, their eyes gouged out, and every one of them still breathing. Mira choked on bile. "What the hell is this place?" A low vibration began to thrum through the floor. The altar started glowing, and beneath it, something moved. Stone grated against stone as a slab shifted, revealing a lower level, a pit filled with dark, writhing water. And from that pit, a sound rose. Not a voice, a call, rhythmic, primal, like a choir of whales humming through jagged glass. Elias clutched his head, falling to his knees. Visions exploded behind his eyes. Ships crashing against unseen reefs, sailors clawing at their eyes, the lighthouse glowing red from beneath the sea, as if built atop something vast and ancient. And then, the eye, not a symbol, a real, living thing, deep beneath the ocean, watching, feeding. When Elias blinked, Mira was gone. He staggered upright. "Mira!" No response. Just the hum. He ran back through the passage, heart hammering. The tunnel seemed to stretch longer now, rippling like a mirage. Lights flickered from the walls, displaying images like film projections, of people he once knew, of his crew, of himself, screaming, laughing, drowning. Then, Mira. She stood in the corridor, back to him, facing the wall. Mira! He called. She didn't turn. He reached out to grab her shoulder. She spun around, and her eyes were gone. Hollow, bleeding. Why did you come here? She asked, her voice echoing in layers. You were warned. Elias fell back, hands shaking. No, you're not her. The figure smiled, mouth stretching far too wide. She is with us now, as are you. It lunged. Elias fired point blank. The figure vanished in smoke. He sprinted, dodging images that clawed at him, and reached the ladder back to the surface. As he emerged, the wind had changed. A thick fog was rolling in from the sea. Fast. Within it, shapes moved. The ships had begun to shift. Their hulls groaned, splintering. Some were reassembling, no longer boats but altars. And from them, figures crawled, soaked, broken, but animated. Elias ran to the hilltop, searching for any familiar face. In the distance, a campfire flickered. He sprinted toward it. Two figures stood by the fire. Lars and Emmett, survivors from the crew. Both looked up, startled. Elias! Emmett stood. Where the hell have you been? No time. This island, it's not just cursed, it's alive. Lars raised a trembling finger toward the sea. They're coming. Elias turned. From the fog, the drowned figures marched in unison. Their faces bore no eyes, no mouths, just the symbol carved into smooth flesh. As they advanced, their movements synchronized with the pulsing hum beneath the ground. Mira stood among them. Lars began to sob. She was alive this morning. She found us. That wasn't her, Elias said quietly. It's using them. It's building something. The three backed away as the sea itself began to rise. Not water, but flesh. Tendrils, coral, eyes, towering and writhing, forming a shape that had no place in this world. The island trembled violently. A scream echoed from the hole where the lighthouse stood. The altar had reawakened. The scream rose like a siren from the depths, rattling the bones of the island. Trees bent against the force of it, and the sky flickered with unnatural lightning, green, violet, and black. Elias, Lars, and Emmett stumbled backward, shielding their ears as the air itself seemed to distort. Then it stopped, sudden, absolute, and silence descended like a curtain. But it wasn't a silence of peace. It was waiting. From the pit where the lighthouse had once stood, something began to rise. A skeletal structure clawed its way upward. Its steeple was shattered, and the wooden doors hung open, inviting and cursed. But Elias paused, sensing something different. A symbol was etched into the stone above the archway, an inverted version of the eye, slashed through with an ancient blade. A seal, he muttered. Something meant to contain it. They stepped inside. The air was thick with incense and mold. Pews were rotted, and stained glass lay shattered across the stone floor. At the far end, an altar stood covered in dusty cloth. Elias peeled it back. A map, etched into obsidian, showing the full island, and beneath it, layers, concentric rings spiraling inward, like a coiled serpent. The island wasn't just a place, it was a lock, and the lighthouse, the key. Lars pointed at a point near the center of the rings, marked with an inlaid ruby. There, that's the heart. Then that's where we go, Elias said. Suddenly the walls shook. A piercing cry split the chapel. From the broken window, Elias saw the new beacon glow fully red, casting a wide circle across the land, and everything it touched moved. The cult was mobilizing, dozens, hundreds of reanimated husks, sea beasts, and whispering shadows poured toward the chapel. Their mouths chanted in harmony. The eye is open. The eye is awake. Elias gritted his teeth. We go underground, now. Behind the altar, they found a hidden staircase spiraling downward, tight and suffocating. The walls here were carved in symbols that bled faint light, illuminating ancient stories. An old god sealed beneath the waves, its eyes stolen by defiant mortals, used to forge a lighthouse, and then corrupted by greed. At the bottom they emerged into a vast cavern. Bioluminescent fungi dotted the walls. A lake of thick, dark fluid churned at the center, and at its heart, suspended above the blackness by web-like sinew, floated a crystalline prison, the heart. It pulsed with a deep rhythmic thud, and within its core flickered the red light. Faces screamed silently inside it, twisted in torment. "This is it," Elias whispered. "This is where it lives." Suddenly a voice echoed from behind them. "You should not have come." It was Mira, or what was left of her. Her body was unchanged, but her voice held too many tones, too many layers. "You could have left. You could have forgotten. But you chose to fight." Her eyes glowed red. "So now, you will join us." Lars raised his rifle. "I can't." Elias stepped forward. "Mira, if any part of you is still there, fight it." She hesitated. Her head twitched. The chamber shuddered. A massive form stirred beneath the fluid lake. Rising just slightly, it was huge. Tentacles curled around the heart crystal. A single eye blinked open beneath the surface, casting the cavern in its glow. Mira screamed, one final, human sound, and lunged at Elias, blade drawn. They clashed. Elias blocked her strike, ducked, rolled, and kicked her back. Lars tried to shoot but couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. "She's gone!" Elias yelled. "No, she's still in there!" Lars cried. The heart pulsed faster. The lake roared. From the edges, tendrils reached for them. Elias knew what had to be done. He grabbed Mira by the shoulders, pinning her down. "I'm sorry," he whispered, then drove his blade into her heart. She gasped and smiled. "Thank you," she said, and dissolved into ash. Lars fell to his knees. The crystal heart began to crack. The eye in the lake blinked and stared directly at Elias. It knew, and it was angry. The eye beneath the lake did not blink again. It watched, frozen in that single monstrous gaze. Elias couldn't breathe. Not because of fear, though that throbbed in every nerve, but because the air had gone still, heavy as seawater in his lungs. Lars remained kneeling beside Mira's ashes, lips moving in prayer or madness. The silence stretched until it cracked, not sound but pressure, like the earth itself had exhaled. And the crystal heart shattered. With a high-pitched shriek that tore through their skulls, the floating gems split into fragments that hovered in the air, pulsing, twitching, alive. The ground shook. Tendrils erupted from the lake, thick as tree trunks, grasping at the walls, the ceiling, them. "Run!" Elias shouted, dragging Lars to his feet. They sprinted across the chamber as the darkness around the lake rose. A grotesque, partial form breached the surface. Not a beast, not a god, but something unfinished. A mass of limbs, mouths, and spines fused together, shaped by centuries of decay and forgotten worship. Eyes covered its bulk, blinking at random, some weeping blood, others shivering like trapped insects. The remains of the shattered heart were being drawn back into it. "Don't let it reabsorb the shards," Elias roared. "That's how it rebuilds." Lars recovered enough to aim and fire. His shot cracked one of the hovering shards, sending it spiraling away. Elias followed, snatching it mid-air and stuffing it into his satchel. Another tendril struck the cavern wall, collapsing part of the passage behind them. The island's moans echoed from above, the lighthouse's hum turning frantic, a panicked heartbeat syncing with the abomination below. "It's tethered," Elias shouted. "The lighthouse, it's channeling power into this thing." As they ran, the veins along the floor glowed brighter, veins leading back up, pumping energy like lifeblood to a corpse trying to rise. They needed to sever the flow. They needed to kill the island. The path curved, becoming a natural tunnel lit by the flicker of strange flames on the walls, burning without smoke, whispering secrets in languages neither man could understand. Symbols danced in the air, some resembling constellations, others living sigils that twisted as they looked at them. Then the whispers started. At first just murmurs in the background. Then names: Mira, Captain Thorne, Elias. It knew them. It remembered every death, every mind it had consumed. Lars clutched his head. "Make it stop. Please, make it stop." Elias grabbed his shoulder. "It's trying to divide us. Stay with me." Then the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was lined with mirrors, but the reflections weren't real. Each surface showed a different version of the world above. In one, the lighthouse stood pristine, its beam white and pure. In another, the island was engulfed in flames. In a third they were the only ones standing, bloody, feral, changed. And in the center of the room stood a man, dressed in a black naval officer's uniform. He was clean-shaven, tall, and unmistakably dead, his face pale, eyes hollow, lips blue. "Captain Josiah Thorne," Elias breathed. The ghost smiled. "You made it farther than most," it said, voice calm, distant. "Few walk this path and return." "You died 80 years ago," Lars said, inching back. "Not quite. I was taken like the rest. But I kept something of myself. Enough to remember what I did." He turned to Elias. "You blew up the lens. Clever. But useless. The eye never dies. It just waits." "What does it want?" Elias asked. Thorne chuckled bitterly. "Not want. Need. It is hunger. It's not a god. Not even a creature. It's an idea, older than light. Older than stars. The lighthouse was the bait. We were the meat. You served it," Elias growled. "You lured ships." "I was desperate," Thorne said. "We all were. It promised to spare us if we obeyed. But it lied. It always lies." Elias stepped forward. "Then help us destroy it." Thorne looked up at the ceiling. "There's a final chamber, beyond the mirrors. It's the source, the last seal. You'll know it when you feel it." Then he turned to Lars. "But he can't come." "What?" Lars stepped back. "Why not?" "It knows his blood," Thorne said gently. "He's been marked. Since the moment the eye touched him back in the storm." Elias looked at his friend. Lars' veins were darker now, his skin thinner, his eyes bloodshot. No, that's not." Lars started, but stopped. Because he knew, "I can fight it." "No, you can't," Thorne said. "But you can stall it." The chamber shook again. The eye below was getting closer. Lars turned to Elias. "You have to go. Finish it." I'll hold the path." Elias hesitated, jaw clenched. "I'm not leaving you." Lars grabbed his wrist. "You have to if that thing gets free." He didn't finish. "He didn't have to." Elias nodded, eyes burning. "Don't let it take you." "I won't," Lars whispered. "Not again." With a final look, Elias turned and stepped through the largest mirror. He didn't pass through glass. He passed through time. Everything inverted, gravity, sound, breath. Then he landed in darkness. It was warm. The tunnel he stood in was red and pulsing, living tissue. The walls breathed, and the air was filled with the constant sound of whispers and water. At the end of the path stood a door made of bone and coral, and behind it, the final chamber, the seal. Elias approached, heart hammering, fingers brushing the last 3 shards from his satchel. He didn't know what waited beyond, but he could feel it. It was awake, and it was watching. The bone door was warm to the touch. Each time Elias pressed against it, it shuddered, flexed, as though resisting his presence. He slid the crystal shards from his satchel, each one still pulsing faintly, with the echo of the heart. When he brought them close to the door, it hissed, retracting like a wound exposing flesh. Beyond it was silence. No whispers, no heartbeat, just a vast, black chamber. Elias stepped inside, careful, blade drawn, every breath echoing like thunder. The room was spherical, its walls covered in tangled roots and glowing veins. Symbols glowed faintly in a ring above, old runes he'd seen in the chapel, and in fragments aboard the wreck of the Red Maiden. All of them pointed down toward a platform. In the center stood an obsidian obelisk. It was ancient, cracked, humming with restrained power. It resembled the eye's pupil, but inverted, sealed, not open. Around its base, 13 stone figures knelt in a circle, blindfolded and mouthless, their heads bowed eternally toward the obelisk. Elias crept forward. He felt it before he saw it. Pressure, like the atmosphere had thickened, a crushing weight on his chest and shoulders. The eye's attention wasn't here. Yet, this was the one place it could not see. He placed the shards around the base of the obelisk. They glowed brighter the moment they touched the stone, fusing into its surface. With a low hum, the pulse returned, but not frantic like before, rhythmic, calming.
A final heartbeat. Then a voice, but it didn't come from the chamber. It came from inside his mind. The seal is weak, strengthen it, or be consumed. Elias gritted his teeth. How? The blind statues moved. Stone cracked. Heads lifted. They turned toward him. Not with sight, but with awareness. And then from the roots behind the obelisk, a face emerged. Mira, but not as she was. This was purer, older. Her features glowed with soft light. Hair flowing as if underwater. A projection. A memory. A remnant. Her voice whispered from everywhere. The eye can only be bound, not destroyed, but it must be fed. Fed, Elias asked. With memory, with sacrifice, with sight. Her voice trembled. The obelisk is the seal. It holds the eye back. It was built long before your kind found this island. It requires an anchor. Elias felt his throat tighten. Someone has to stay. Mira's apparition nodded. Then her image flickered. Corrupted by flashes of blood, tentacles, and bone, she screamed, face splitting down the middle before vanishing entirely. The chamber shuddered. The seal had been noticed. Above, the hum of the lighthouse stopped. Utter silence. Then came the screaming, hundreds of voices at once, overlapping in every language and none. From the ceiling, a tendril punched through, writhing wildly, dripping with ichor, and twitching with hundreds of tiny mouths. Elias rolled out of the way as it slammed into the obelisk. He drew his blade and plunged it into the tendril. The metal hissed, burning the creature, and it recoiled with an otherworldly screech. But more were coming. Tendrils erupted from all sides, snapping and writhing. Elias fought them, hacking wildly, his arms burning, blood flying. One wrapped around his leg and lifted him, but he spun and slashed, severing it midair and crashing to the ground in a spray of black bile. The 13 statues had risen fully now. Each one stepped forward and placed their hands on the obelisk. Light poured from their palms, weaving together into a glowing lattice. Elias stumbled toward the final shard, the one he hadn't yet placed. It hovered in his hand, shaking violently. Something behind him whispered his name. He turned and saw Lars, or what remained of him. His body was bloated, half covered in seaweed and coral. His eyes glowed red, his mouth stretched into a too-wide grin. And yet, somewhere, deep inside, was recognition. Elias, he rasped. It hurts. Elias stepped back. Lars, what did it do to you? It showed me everything, every storm, every soul. It's endless. He raised his hand inside it. The final fragment. I took it when you weren't looking, Lars said. I wanted to understand. I thought I could stop it. Elias held out his hand. You still can't. Give it to me. Lars smiled, sad, broken. No, I can't leave, but I can anchor. And before Elias could stop him, Lars stepped into the obelisk's ring. He placed the shard on his chest and pressed it in. Light exploded from his body. The tendrils shrieked and burned, pulling back. The statues turned to face him and knelt. Lars fell to his knees, light pouring from his eyes and mouth. Elias cried out, but knew it was done. The seal was binding. The eyes screamed. A final earth-shaking roar echoed through the chamber above. The sky split open, lightning tearing across the heavens in spirals. The ocean crashed violently against the island's cliffs. From the ruins of the lighthouse, a pillar of red fire surged upward and collapsed in on itself. The eye was being pulled back. The tendrils withdrew. The chamber dimmed. Silence returned. Elias dropped to his knees, panting, covered in blood, ash and tears. Lars was gone. Only a faint glow remained where he had stood. The obelisk was whole again, for now. But Elias knew the curse was only sleeping. He staggered out of the chamber. As the walls began to seal behind him, the island groaned, its purpose fulfilled once more. And from the shoreline far below, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. But no one would believe what had happened. Not yet. Not until it woke again.
The sea was calm. For the first time in what felt like eternity, the waves lapped gently against the jagged rocks of Black Hollow Isle, no longer gnashing like hungry teeth. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting pale gold across the fractured cliffs and the splintered ruins of the lighthouse. Smoke curled upward from where the great beam once stood, but the hum, the awful pulsing heartbeat, had ceased. Elias stood alone at the cliff's edge. His coat was torn. His hands bled from cuts both fresh and deep. The satchel that once held the crystal shards now hung limp at his side. The final glow faded from within. Behind him the island felt hollow, as if the eye's presence, though sealed, had drained the very soul of the land. The ground no longer whispered. The shadows no longer moved, but the silence that remained, and Elias knew silence had never meant safety. It meant the eye was watching. He turned toward the path winding down to the beach, once overgrown and treacherous, now cleared, perhaps by force, perhaps by fate. The skiff he and Lars had used to reach the island still rocked in the shallows, miraculously untouched. It was the only thing left untouched. Lars, Elias closed his eyes. He could still hear his voice echoing in that final chamber. "It hurts," Lars had said, and yet in the end, he'd chosen to stay, chosen to become the anchor, chosen to stop it. But how long would the seal hold? As Elias stepped onto the beach, his boots crunching against shattered coral and driftwood bones, the wind shifted. With it came a smell, not rot, not salt, smoke. He spun. The lighthouse's ruined peak had ignited again, just a flicker at first, then a sliver of red light emerging from within the cracks of the broken stone. It pulsed once, then vanished. Elias blinked hard. Hallucination. He'd had plenty. And yet as he boarded the skiff and took one final glance back at the island, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. A figure, standing on the edge of the cliff, watching. Lars. No. Too tall, the stance too rigid. The figure raised one hand in a silent wave, then stepped backward, and was gone. Elias rode in silence, muscles aching, eyes fixed on the rising sun. The storm was over, yes, but something inside him knew the truth. This story was not over, not truly. The eye never dies. 1 week later, Briarwick Harbor. The tavern was warm, full of firelight and murmuring locals. Fishermen gathered at the bar, mugs of frothy ale clutched in rough hands. Old sea dogs recounted tall tales, laughter mixing with the smell of brine and pipe smoke. It was the kind of place where stories lived forever. Elias sat at a corner table, hood drawn low. He'd returned to the mainland, a ghost of the man who'd left. The Coast Guard had found his skiff drifting near the rocks and pulled him aboard, dazed and mumbling. He told them nothing. They'd asked about Lars, about the storm, about why the sky had turned red over Black Hollow Isle. He told them nothing. Who would believe him? A few nights after his return, he'd started dreaming. They always began the same. Lars kneeling before the obelisk, light pouring from his chest. But each night the dream changed. The light would dim. The chamber would crack. Sometimes the eye would open again. Then Elias would wake, drenched in sweat, his ears ringing with whispers. Tonight was no different. The fire crackled in the hearth behind him. His untouched drink had long since gone cold. Then a shadow fell across his table. "Excuse me," said a voice. Feminine, confident, British accent, sharp and precise. He looked up. She was in her 30s. Dark hair tied back in a professional bun. Long coat dusted with road grime. A leather satchel hung from her shoulder, and around her neck hung a small brass compass that ticked without wind. "I believe you're Elias Rowan," she said. He tensed. "Who's asking?" She slid into the seat across from him. "My name's Dr. Evelyn Graves, paranormal anthropologist, Cambridge. I study sites of mass psychic trauma, relic worship, and unexplainable coastal phenomena." He narrowed his eyes. "And what do you want from me?" Her expression didn't change. "I want to know what happened on Black Hollow Isle." Elias laughed bitterly. "Nothing you want to see. You're wrong," she said. "I've been there. Last year, before the storm, I found stone circles, unnatural magnetic fields.
and hieroglyphs etched into the cliffs, symbols that match nothing in any known culture. And then the storm came. You were the only survivor. She leaned forward. The eye isn't sealed, is it? Elias met her gaze and said nothing. That silence was answer enough. Dr. Graves nodded, as if confirming a theory. I think it's calling others now, she said. Since your return, 6 vessels have gone missing along that coast. Their distress calls all included, a word repeated over and over. Elias froze. What word? She opened her notebook and turned it around. Scrawled in black ink were 4 simple letters, EYE. He stood up abruptly. Stop. You don't know what you're chasing. You think it's a mystery, something you can file in a journal. It's not. She didn't flinch. You didn't kill it. You just made it hungrier. He grabbed his coat. Whatever's happening out there now, it's not my problem. You're wrong again, she said as he turned. You're the only one it let leave. He stopped. It marked you, she whispered, and it never lets go. Elias left the tavern without another word. That night, he wandered the docks, staring out at the ocean. Somewhere beyond the black waves, Black Hollow Isle still stood, quiet, patient, waiting, and as the wind shifted, carrying the salty breath of the sea across the harbor, Elias heard something, a faint hum, not from the water, from inside him, a pulse, a whisper, come back. And in the distant night, across the water, a faint red beam shimmered through the clouds. Brief, like a blink, the eye had opened.